Good morning, everybody. Everybody in the room, everybody in virtual land. My name is Tracy Brown, and I am so glad to have the opportunity to dive into the Science of Mind textbook, The Science of Mind, written by Ernest S. Holmes, and to talk about it, to think about it, to dive a little bit more deeply into what Ernest Holmes was trying to remind us of, and then to also think about how that applies to our lives. So, if this happens to be your first time with us, or only your first or second time, it's really simple. We open the textbook and we go page by page. We happen to be up to page 419. It's taken us a little while to get there, but we'll be starting today on page 419. I invite you to join me in taking a deep, deep breath. Claiming, declaring, and knowing that this is the perfect time to learn a little and to do that in community, right here, right now. And so it is. So we are going to begin on page 419, the first full paragraph, but I want to set a little bit of context. So we've been over the last few weeks talking about and reading from the general summary. Now, before the general summary, Ernest Holmes had been teaching us for more than 390 pages what are these principles called science of mind? What is it? What's the faith part of it? What is the philosophy part of it? And what does it mean to make it a way of life? And then he decides, I've written a whole lot, almost 400 pages, maybe I better summarize it. And so he takes about 40 pages to summarize the previous 400 pages almost. And in this general summary, the first few pages, probably the first 8 or 9 pages, he actually summarizes all of the basic points of the philosophy, the spiritual principles that drive the entire philosophy, everything that we believe and why. And then he moves into a section that focuses on the way you apply it, like what we do. And that's where we've been the last few weeks, actually taking, a page or a page and a half at a time. So we've probably been in that section about 5 weeks. And today, he starts moving us into, once you know it, and you start practicing it, you move into being it. And that's really what we call a mystic. You live your life in a way that you are demonstrating the mystical quality or the mystical nature of divine law. So that's where we're starting on page 419, first full paragraph. A mystic is one who intuitively perceives truth and who, without conscious mental process, arrives at spiritual realization. I'm just going to read that first sentence again because it really says everything. We could probably spend 2 hours just talking about that sentence. What is a mystic? Page 419, first full paragraph. A mystic is one who intuitively perceives truth and who, without conscious mental process, arrives at spiritual realization. The mystics include the great prophets, the inspired writers, the illumined souls of all ages. What we have received from them constitutes the greatest intellectual and spiritual heritage of the ages. all of the mystics have recognized the absolute unity of God and man, the spiritual and the divine, the spiritual and the human, the divinity and the humanity. Yes, I'm listening to myself. I can feel my brain waking up. So all of the mystics have recognized the absolute unity of God and man. Within the infinite mind, each individual exists not as a separated, but as a separate and distinct entity. We each are a point in universal consciousness, which is God or spirit or the universe. We have not separated, we are not separated from life, neither is life separated from us. But we are separate entities within it. We are individualized centers of God consciousness. Third paragraph. True mystics have not denied the reality of individuality. They have all agreed that the soul is on the pathway of experience. The soul is on the pathway of self-discovery. The soul is on the way to its Father's house. They have told us of the marvelous relationship which exists between God and humanity, of a close union which cannot be broken. Okay, there's a little bit there in those 3 paragraphs. You might want to stay there for just a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the first one. A mystic is one who intuitively perceives truth and who without conscious mental process arrives at spiritual realization. So most of us have had those moments where we're having a mystical experience. We don't know why we know, but we know, right? Or we intuitively know it's time to go in a certain direction. And then our best friend, our spouse, our neighbor, our boss says, well, why do you want to do that? And you have no answer. You know, but you have no way of explaining it. That is the mystical. And often what we do is when we are really clear that that is the direction for us to take, but we can't logically rationalize it in a way that will make sense to others, we just dismiss it. Or worse, we judge it and we tell ourselves we don't know what we're doing. Now, I'm not suggesting that if you find yourself at a party and all of a sudden you have a desire to go jump in somebody's car and like drive to California and you're here in Texas. I'm not saying that that's the same as a mystical experience. Okay. That you could have too much to drink or otherwise imbibe or experience. You could, yeah, that could be insanity. That could be a lot of things. It's probably not a mystical experience. Although, it's not totally impossible that you really could not be just thinking it and wanting it, but it could be some revelation. But it's not likely. More in things that are life directional or you really, I'm just thinking of times where I knew I should start moving toward a certain focus in my business, or I knew it was time to end a relationship or move in another direction in a relationship. And it's not something I had been thinking about. It's not something I've been planning or plotting or researching, but I knew. I'm thinking of one example where really the inner message I got, because I had a thought to go in a certain direction in my life, and I was asking myself, why would you want to do that? Right, that would mean I have to give up this and I have to change that, and I will, quote unquote, lose these three things that I really like, and I have to shift some of the people that I'm involved with and hanging out. I'm asking myself, I didn't have to wait for my friends or somebody to ask me. I was asking, why would you want to do that? And I had no real answer, except I just knew. And very quickly after that, I was asked a question from the inside out. Are you going to choose God or man? Ooh. Ooh, and it wasn't like a challenge. It was just a little quiet question. Like, are you going to choose your human comfort? Or are you going to choose this new adventure that you have no idea where it's going to take you really? But it does make sense if I would just get out of my own way and do it. That really is kind of the pattern or an example of how you might feel when you are in the mystical experience. But most of us only have that experience like in isolated situations because we are so attached to our human thinking and all of the human design that we hear about or that we see in the media of what we should want or how our lives should be or what security looks like or what wealth looks like or what beauty looks like. And we get so wrapped up in that that we kind of move away from that quiet voice that says, why don't you try this? Maybe you could go over here. So that first sentence of defining what is a mystic is someone who, not 100% of the time, but who recognizes the truth with a capital T, and without analyzing it, without processing it, without making logic of it, arrives at spiritual realization. Here's how the universe is working, always working, and here's how the universe is working through me or for you or for all of us collectively in our society or in our community or in our family. So that's really key because we teach and we believe that every one of us has the capability to be operating in our life. If we are being guided by these principles, every one of us can be a mystic. So remember I said in this general summary, he spends the first 10 pages or so really just reminding us of what are the spiritual principles that are universal. The second 10 pages or so, really, he spends about, okay, here's how you practice it. And all he's doing now in the last 15, or not even 15, the last 10 pages or so, is all he's doing is saying, if you have the awareness, if you know the principles and you apply them in your life, this is what's going to show up. This is how it's going to show up. And I have people who will come in for prayer after service or will email during the week and ask for a prayer or ask for a coaching session. And what's happened is that this stuff is working and it scares them. They're actually showing up as a mystic in their life and in the world, and it's like, oh, ooh, wait a minute. Ooh, I don't know. There's so much good happening. Something bad is about to happen, right? Because sometimes we're not ready, or we don't believe that we can be the mystic. So if you have a biblical background, then you know that there are a number of places in the New Testament where Jesus says to the disciples, everything I'm doing, you can do it too. Like, I'm not special. I'm just following spiritual principle, getting in alignment with it, living it every day. So this has to happen. And your life can be the same way. So there are a number of places where that's the message from the way shower, and that's what we too teach in Science of Mind. If you live these principles, your life is going to be amazing. Amazing. And that's actually the theme this month. Like, what do you have faith in? And can you reimagine your faith to such a degree that this is who you are in the world? One who intuitively perceives truth and who without conscious mental process arrives at spiritual realization. Spiritual realization. Spiritual realization. Another word for that would be heaven. As above, so below. Spiritual realization. I am realizing in my life the universal spiritual principles operating, and I have a life I love. If I am not willing to recognize the principles, practice them, apply them in my life, then I may not have spiritual realization. I will not have spiritual realization. And what would that be called? Spiritual realization would be like heaven. Not having spiritual realization would be like in the old mindset.
We don't believe in hell.
And that's why in Science of Mind we don't believe in hell, because we are born of original blessing. We apply the way that we live, we apply these principles, and we are constantly moving toward spiritual realization. No matter what we do, no matter what we experience, we are simply moving one step closer to spiritual realization in our lives. Ernest Holmes does we're going to be thinking of your questions and your comments and your examples, because in 2 minutes we're going to go to what you have to say about this and how it applies to you. And Ernest Holmes did a beautiful lecture that was transcribed about alcoholism and how we apply these principles, both if we are the person who is addicted to or doing behaviors that society has labeled as alcoholism, and also if we are the person who is knowing the truth for that person. Like, I don't believe that's your truth. This is not all of who you are. And it's so amazing because it is the opposite of maybe what many of us thought or were exposed to before. Oh, well, that person who would be described as, their behavior would be described as, oh, they are doing things, they must be an alcoholic, and they are going to hell. we don't look at it that way. When we recognize the truth of spiritual principle, we say these are behaviors that are not leading to this person's best and highest good. But you could change your mind today and move towards spiritual realization. And I'm here to help you do that. Because that is your birthright. That is actually who you were created to be. And so everybody's not at the place of being a mystic, like that what we're reading about today. But everybody is wherever they are on their journey toward becoming a mystic. By how much awareness, how much practice, and then living the life. You know, I was going to say, and then the miracles begin, except that I can't even say that because it's not a miracle. It's like it is a guaranteed automatic way that your life will unfold because you are learning and then you're doing the work. There's no miracle to that. It's not magic. It's principle. So we've got 3 paragraphs into Mystic. Mystics have recognized the absolute unity of divinity and humanity. So I'm glad I didn't read this before I prepared today's talk, because it would be a whole different talk, and now I want to do it. Okay, so Ryan, let's get some comments, some examples, and I'm going to ask you if you do have a question that you go right to the question. And if you have a comment, make the point of the example as quickly as you can.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Hi, hello. I'm Ryan. I'm the guy in the sky with the smooth and silky voice. Why does everybody laugh when I say that? I'm serious. Anyways, I want to let everybody know that we have a new artist of the month. If you see behind you, Tracy, there's an artist. Her name is Cassie Shank. And so you'll see her beautiful artwork. And Richard is here helping to show all the folks online. So this is an engaging discussion. And we have a couple different ways that you can do that. If you're here in the room with us, just go ahead and can everybody raise their right hand for me? Okay, just want to make sure that we're alive. All right. Well, wave hello to a neighbor. There you go. Say hello, neighbor. All right, and those who are online here with us, even though you can't see each other, make sure to check in on the chat and say hello to all your neighbors. And if you have a question or a comment, hit the raise your hand icon and I can bring you into the room. And I see we have a lot of folks who are joining us from all over the world on the Facebook Live. So hello to everybody who's joining us, no matter what time it is where you're at. Make sure to check in and tell us where you're watching us from and put your questions and comments inside of there as well, and I'll bring them into the room. And I always just want to mention that I keep the chats anonymous. That way we have a safe container of spiritual growth. So I see that we do have somebody here on Zoom. Do we have anybody in the room that'd like to share or comment first before we go there? Oh, and by the way, my iconic Richard is in the house here today, and he'll help assist me in handing the mic. When you get the microphone, just make sure to say your name, and that way folks online can hear you as well.
Hi, this is JL Summers. So I have a comment, an example, and I would never have used the phrase mystic before, but years ago, and I probably overshare, but years ago I was in an abusive marriage, and I had a son who I was able to see God in and through. And that encouraged me to move and escape that situation because of that being that came in my life. And throughout the years, I've constantly seen God in him in turn seeing God in me. Yeah, and I think that was like that was mystical. One of the definitions I looked up because I just wanted to see how other people would phrase it, and they said mystic has the ability to be so open as to stretch beyond the usual small and protective ego, and they are often unusually courageous. And I think that is the part where, yeah, people look and they say, wow, you left and you left everything? Yes. Something said get up and go. and and life has done that to me several times where it was like, okay, and it always have moved me in a better state, in a better direction, knowing that, I'm walking in my truth.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And there is no such thing as oversharing, but they, and because it's the real life examples that actually help it makes sense to the human part of our brain, even though the divinity is like I've got this. So a couple of things that I do want to like emphasize. One, you're right. Sometimes what happens is we see the perfection in others, or we see spiritual possibility through others, but you can't see something that you don't already have within you. So when we talk about oneness and that we are all from the same, it's like I may not be willing to see it, but that it resonates, or I get clear because I see it in you, and I don't have the story about you that I have about myself. So that really is often an open door. And the second thing was that other definition of the mystic, going beyond the usual in a way that to others and sometimes to themselves looks courageous. But when it's coming from that spiritually grounded place, it's not so much courage as I have to do it. I'm doing it, and I know it's the right thing to do. But externally, or in a sense of logic, it seems like, how did you have the courage to do that? I couldn't not do it. Okay, Ryan.
Okay, Tracy, I have Dennis. Okay, Dennis, can you unmute yourself and join the conversation?
Dennis, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Hey, okay. So when I'm kind of like JL about I would never consider it mystic, but okay, so here's the deal. I've mentioned this before, these two paragraphs you read. When I'm in alignment, spiritually grounded, which I try to do all the time, but of course sometimes I slip. My mouth opens and but I have discovered over the years, and it's fun. I mean, I don't play it as a game. I just enjoy watching it unfold. There's been several times to where when I'm spiritually grounded, a situation arises. The decisions I make from a spiritual standpoint are more often than not totally upside down to what the secular world would like. How could you be so kind? Why didn't you this? Why didn't you that? Okay, so I have learned, and like you said, it's not really courage, it's just if I do the right thing, everything's going to turn out, and it's amazing to just step back and watch it unfold. And everything is poof, and I keep my peace, and everybody's happy, and sometimes you get apologies and things just work out well. Now, another example I was thinking about, so now I'm going to a question I have. Okay. Several years ago, I had Kat, and last few months of her life were actually really what I refer to as kitty hospice. Okay. And so several times during those few months, I thought, well, is today the day? But I kept putting it off. One morning I got up. Today's the day. I can't explain to you how I knew that. I just knew it. Okay. And there was peace in taking her and helping her across the Rainbow Bridge. And yes, there was sadness that she was gone, but there was peace in knowing it was time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I referred to that situation as intuition. So here's my question. What's the difference between intuition and mysticism?
I was loving all your comments, and then you asked me a question, like a challenging question, like, Dennis, come on, what is up with that? No, it's a perfect question. And I don't know that there is a difference. I think there's a small distinction, possibly, but I think what we refer to as intuition is very similar to how we think of a mystic behaving, being guided by an inner awareness of what is in alignment with spiritual law. Now, the one place where they would be really very different would be if I was always talking about my intuition in terms of material things, right? Because the way that we live, and the way we apply spiritual truth and spiritual principles, how we are as a person, how we show up in the world, that a lot of that is probably in direct alignment with being a mystic or expressing life or experiencing life in mystical ways. But when we have intuition, and some people use intuition more in a manipulation way, that's not the same as living as a mystic. But in this conversation with this group, you know, we are talking about it in that context of spirituality, and I doubt that many of us, or if any of us, are thinking about some of the ways we say, oh, it's, you know, oh, it's women's intuition to get what I want, right, or something like that. But the true intuitive knowing, when we have been doing our spiritual practice and we have made that commitment to be the example of spiritual principle, we don't have to think about everything. I know your parents told you, think before you speak, right? Your teachers told you, you need to think that through before you make a plan. There are times for that. But in who we are in the world, allowing the spiritual truth to actually guide us, to listen and recognize it, because it's always guiding us, but we're not always listening. Well, okay, I'm sorry. How rude of me to say we. I know that Spirit is always providing guidance in physical and non-physical ways, and in the interest of oversharing. And there are days and times and moments and years where I am not paying attention. I am not listening. Let alone those few now in my life, few times where I'm actively resisting. But when I'm not doing those two things, it's there, and I trust it, and I allow it to guide me, and I follow it. So by show of hands in the room, do you have anybody else, Ryan? But let me, by show of hands in the room, and by yes in the chat, if you are online, how many of you are able to say there have been times you have experienced where you recognize, oh, I am a little bit of a mystic? Put yes in the chat if you're online. I'd say 2/3 of the people in the room raise their hands. Yes. And this is, in Science of Mind and at CSLDallas, one of the things we try to remind you of all the time is that if you could experience it once, you can experience it over and over and over and over until what happens is that you become so accustomed to living this spiritually guided life that when the human side gets a little out of balance, you notice it right away. You're not going to go for 6 months in a toxic situation that you would have 10 years ago, not even recognized it as toxic. Because we're building, we're going from expressing our lives to expanding our lives to evolving our lives. So once we begin to have those experiences and we have them over and over and over again, we notice when the experience we have is out of alignment with that. And we do the work to get back in alignment and move toward, it wasn't spiritual activation, spiritual realization is what Ernest Holmes called it.
You know, I had an interesting comment that came in here, and it started me thinking along the topic of what we're talking about. It says, sometimes we confuse hindsight bias with intuition. Think about that for a second. That's a pretty deep, profound thought there. And how does that control and influences the current scenarios that we're in?
We have some smart people. When I think about folks who are participating in all things CSLDallas, I am constantly reminded, not amazed, but constantly reminded that there are a bunch of folks who are smarter than me. And this is a good thing because we all learn it together. But this is a really good observation because hindsight bias, if you're not familiar with it, is that, you know, when we have experienced things over and over before in the past, or even not over and over before, it could be we experienced it one time, but it gave us a lesson, a really, really powerful lesson, that we take that in, and then anything that happens in our lives that is vaguely or remotely similar, we automatically assume it's going to have the same result or it's going to play out the same way because we have that hindsight and we use it to bias what we do or say now. Here's what's tricky about this. We teach, change your thinking, change your life. At the same time, everything that has ever happened in your life before this very moment does influence what you know, what you believe, how you think, how you behave. And we tell you to change your behavior, but on the human scale, if your brain is working properly, there is no way for your brain to forget what it knows, what it read, what it saw, what it experienced in that bad relationship, the teacher who told you you should never be an artist because you weren't good at it, the parent who told you children are better seen than heard, right? You don't speak up, or because you are in this group or that group, you want, all of that is in us. So there's no way if your brain is working to eliminate bias, whether it is bias about people or bias about what happened to you in the past. So in Science of Mind, what we really go back to over and over and over again is don't look backwards, and we don't have to know all the whys. I don't have to know why you think that way or what happened. I don't have to know why I think the way that I think or why something happened that scarred me for life. human perspective, scarred me for life. I get to choose right now from the spiritual perspective that everything that happened and everything that's happening now, everything that happened for me, not to me. And everything that is happening now is happening for my greater good. So with hindsight bias, if I find myself making decisions and I'm like, oh, it's intuition, I know this is how the world works, I have to look at that. Am I assuming based on what happened in the past and limiting spirit? Principle is not bound by precedent. Doesn't matter if it happened 10 years ago, 10 minutes ago. My job in applying science of mind, my job is to decide what I want and to go toward that. One final comment that keeps popping into my mind as I'm talking. Hindsight bias, we can tend to look at it as if we're going to remember all the bad stuff that happened and it could influence us and we could think it's intuition because we're protecting ourselves from that happening again. But here's the nasty little secret. Hindsight bias is also there for all the good stuff. So if I find myself assuming that this person loves me or this is the way it should be because I've only had good things happen to me in the past, I could not be courageous and go in a different direction because I'm trying to stay safe or I'm trying to keep producing the same result the same way, using the same people and the same process and the same way of approaching things when it's time for me in my life to try something new. And now it's good, hindsight bias of good things happening. Okay, that could be good because I'm going to assume something good's happening. But I shouldn't be doing that based on hindsight alone. I should be doing that because that's spiritual law. It's spiritual law that my highest good is seeking to express and evolve. It is spiritual law that the universe is here to support me in my good. So it's not intuition, it's not being a mystic if I'm saying, because look, this is what my parents gave me. And look, this is, I've had my own car since I was 16. And look, I've had really good jobs in the past. The universe doesn't care. The universe cares about, are you in alignment with spiritual principle? Are you choosing for your best and highest good? And are you living in a way that generates love, peace, joy, beauty, harmony, wholeness, order, etc., etc., etc.? Spirit is not looking at your past. Spirit is linking arms with you where you are today and saying, where are we going now? Let's do that. Are we going to squeeze in one more, or are we going to?
Well, what I was going to say is I do have some hindsight bias, y'all. I do. It's that the celebration that's coming up here in about 30 minutes is going to be off the chain because we got Speaker Tracy Brown in the house today. So if you guys are up to it, we can all have a fun time together. That's all I just want to squeeze in. That's it.
Whether you're in the room or whether you are on YouTube or Facebook, if you are at all interested in reimagining faith, what it means, and how it can work in your life, that is the theme for the month of August. And yes, celebration service and music starts in about 25 minutes. Service starts in about 30 minutes. And today we'll be talking about your faith mindset. So if you would just, at home and here, take a deep breath and say yes 3 times. That is how we will end our time together. Take a deep breath. Yes, yes, yes. And so it is.